Prologue. The Whisper of Nagash. The sands of Necrarch whispered secrets no mortal should hear. Beneath the dead sun and the wind-scraped bones of 1,000 forgotten cities, there stretched a labyrinth of catacombs, long abandoned by life, but never by death. It was within one of these ancient ossuaries, deep beneath the shattered ruins of Khazad, that Vranek the Pale stirred from his centuries-long torpor. He did not breathe, his desiccated lungs were useless sacks of shriveled tissue, but he felt the pulse of something older than the sands, darker than the pitiless nights. Something calling. The catacombs trembled as Vranek rose from his coffin of obsidian and flayed human skin, the sigils etched across its surface glowing faintly red in the absolute dark. Bones cracked beneath his feet as he emerged, his form gaunt and angular, skin stretched paper-thin over a lattice of bone and sinew. Eyes like blood-lit pearls stared into the gloom as if it were daylight. A whisper coiled through the air like smoke, thin, serpentine, and ancient, not spoken aloud yet thunderous in his mind. Seek the shard. In the temple of scales and stars. The crown remembers. The voice was not one, it was many. Legion. It writhed through his soul, hollowing him with its hunger. He fell to his knees, arms stretched, blood seeping from his ears in sluggish black rivulets. Visions assailed him. A crown of obsidian and warpstone, broken, scattered. One jagged piece, its edges aglow with sickly green fire, lay cradled in the jaws of a stone colossus, buried in jungle vines thicker than men's torsos. Gold and turquoise lizard-men carvings towered around it. Glyphs of the old ones flickered with dormant cosmic menace. Then darkness, and then power, endless, undying power. When the vision passed, Vranek rose with unnatural stillness. The light of hatred had returned to his eyes, but now it was joined by something more. Obsession. He would have the shard, not for Nagash, not for any other Lord of Undeath, for himself. The next weeks were a flurry of sorcerous preparation and necromantic engineering. The sand-choked tombs of Necrarch were turned inside out, plundered not for gold, but for the flesh and souls of the once great. He stood atop ziggurats under the black sun, arms spread, chanting in tongues that made the desert scream. From beneath the dunes, the ground buckled and tore, broken bones knitted together with shrieks of agony. Cursed blood spilled like wine over ancient carvings. And one by one, Vranek's champions clawed their way back into the world. Kaldrak the Harrowing, once a chaos warlord who defied gods and died laughing, now bound in rusting plate, his blackened flesh alive with spiteful warp taint. Mourntongue, a priest from the Forest of Shadows, his tongue severed and replaced by a cluster of centipedes that whispered secrets only the dead should know. Sorvath the helmsman, a drowned vampire who'd once captained the ghost ship Fleshrain, his spine twisted like a rope and his body forever dripping seawater that stank of rotting kraken flesh. Isha, a banshee witch trapped within a crystal mirror, whose scream could burst marrow from bone. And more, a choir of abominations, ghouls sewn together into single beasts, necromantic golems powered by bound souls, revelant mariners reanimated from coral-covered wrecks. He christened the Dreadfleet's flagship the Hollow Rain, a bark of black iron and cursed wood hewn from the trees of the blighted marshes. Its sails were woven from flayed skin and runes of binding. Its figurehead was a screaming maiden, her mouth agape in eternal torment. On the night they departed, the skies bled red. Vranek stood at the prow, his voice echoing across the dark waters of the river Mortis. Lustria calls, the shard awaits. let the living tremble. Thunder rolled not from the sky, but from below, as the ship's hull shuddered with the weight of the cursed tide pulling it forth. Thus began the corpsebound's journey, not a voyage of hope or glory, but of blasphemy and hunger, of blood and bone and whispers older than gods. The shard of Nagash's crown was out there, buried in a temple untouched by time and guarded by beasts born of stars. And Vranek the Pale would stop at nothing to claim it. Chapter 1. The Corpsebound Crew. The dock was a graveyard. Not the polite, stone-lined tombs of men with names and legacies, but a true necropolis. Rotted wooden piers jutting into stagnant black water like broken fingers, each one crusted with barnacles and bones, each nail rusted with the blood of forgotten sacrifices. The air buzzed with flies, fat on the meat of the dead. Even the moon above, an ashen eye in the storm-laced sky, seemed reluctant to witness what was about to be born. From the fog-choked mire came the sound of chains being dragged, slow, heavy, purposeful. And then, with a screech like 1,000 dying gulls, the hollow rain emerged from beneath the waters. She was no ordinary galley. Her hull was fused bone and rusting iron, each plank etched with runes in flayed skin that pulsed as if still alive. A figurehead in the shape of a weeping maiden stretched along the prow, her mouth opened in an eternal wail, teeth of sharpened obsidian glinting with rot. Her eyes bled rivers of cursed ichor into the sea, staining it a sickly green. The sails, tattered and forever billowing in an unseen wind, were stitched from the hides of sacrificed mortals, each face frozen mid-scream, mouths moving as if pleading for release. Soul lanterns hung from the masts, their fire not of flame, but of bound spirits writhing in cages of rib and rune, casting sickly pallor over the deck. And at the helm stood Sorvath, the drowned vampire. His hands, fleshless, wrapped in soaked grave bandages, gripped the bone-spun wheel. Water seeped from his armor in endless rivulets. His face was a swollen, barnacled mask, and beneath the surface of his milky eyes swam slivers of dead sea creatures. He did not speak. He steered. The deck came alive with movement, not footsteps, not breathing, but twitching, stuttering, spasming grotesqueries. Ghouls crawled across the wood like vermin, naked save for crusted blood and jagged teeth. Some walked on all fours, others clung to the rigging like spiders. Each had a bell embedded in their flesh, so their approach was always heralded by an eerie, metallic jingling. Their eyes were pits of endless hunger. Among them walked reapers, former men, now revenants clad in rusted chainmail and funeral masks of hammered iron. Where their hearts once beat now glowed green warp flame. Their limbs moved stiffly, guided by threads of necromantic will, their great swords dragging behind them with hollow clangs. Morn Tongue, the ghoul priest, hunched over a pit in the center of the deck, the cauldron pit, filled with black sludge that breathed and hissed. From it he pulled bones and reassembled them into malformed crows, which flew off into the night, cawing in tongues never meant for this world. His tongue, an amalgam of centipedes, twitched constantly, each insect hissing heresies. But none of these were Vranek's true prize. That came in the deepest hold, where the dark was thickest, and even the dead refused to tread. There, amidst a circle of blood-dripped sigils carved into rotting iron, lay a corpse entombed in layers of blackened armor. The air around it was cold, cold even to the dead. Frost cracked along the metal, and the skull beneath the horned helm seemed to grin with menace. Chains bound him in place, not to keep him restrained, but to keep the world safe. Vranek stood over it now, arms raised, his voice cut through the gloom in a tongue from the north, old and spined with hatred. Blood-forged warrior of the black gods. Kaldrak, champion of the screaming pit, your bones are needed. Rise. There was no thunder, no storm, only silence, and then the snap of metal as one chain shattered. The sound tortured, then another, then the sound of iron grinding against iron as the corpse stood. Baldrak rose like a mountain come alive. His armor groaned with rust, sigils of the dark gods now scorched black, his blade a jagged hunk of obsidian fused with demon bone, resting on his back. His voice, when it came, was like grave dirt falling on a coffin lid. I was promised the end of all things. What do you offer, pale maggot? Vranek did not flinch. He simply smiled, a crack of white in a gaunt, bloodless face. The shard of Nagash's crown. Power beyond even your blasphemous gods. Come, Kaldrak. Help me claim it, and I will see your name etched into the bones of the world. The revenant warrior tilted his head, and then he laughed, a broken, metallic sound, like a dying bell. Then let's gut the world. Chains fell, and the hollow rain groaned as if in fear of its newest passenger. By night's end, the Corpsebound Crew had assembled. No cheers, no songs, only whispers and the endless creaking of wood on cursed water. They were an armada of damnation, and Vranek stood at its helm. Beyond the edge of the sea lay Lustria. Beyond the jungle lay the temple, and within that temple lay a fragment of a god's unholy legacy. The corpse-bound would sail, and they would kill eternity to reach it. Chapter 2. The Map of Skulls. The hollow rain glided across the black sea like a phantom, her sails bloated with wind that didn't blow. The water beneath her hull was not water, it was something thicker, something that resisted light, where malformed fish with too many eyes writhed just below the surface. The stars above blinked unnaturally, as if averting their gaze. All knew where they sailed, to the edge of the known world, to a place no man charted without losing more than his life. Their destination lay not in any harbor or isle, but in the space between, a shoal of shattered rock and memory, where broken ships drifted like corpses, and a fog thicker than oil swallowed even nightmares. They called it the maw of the drowned king. No birds flew here, no sound but the groaning of sunken wrecks and the whispers of drowned sailors echoing up from the abyss. There, amid a wreath of shipwrecks impaled on stone spires, they found it. A floating mausoleum carved from coral and bone, crowned by a single black spire that dripped ichor into the sea. Its windows glowed faintly with spectral light. The cartographer was waiting. Inside the mausoleum's hollow halls, the air was dead, truly dead. Even the undead felt it. No wind stirred, no breath echoed, only the sound of their own steps, muffled by centuries of decay. The central chamber was circular, its floor lined with skulls etched with arcane markings, arranged in constellations of the old world. Ghost lanterns flickered above, casting ever-changing shadows across the walls. At the center stood a mirror, 10 feet tall, framed in rusted iron and rimmed with talismans made of children's teeth. Its surface was dark glass, shifting like smoke behind crystal. And then it spoke. A voice, wet, sibilant, layered with centuries of torment, dripped from the mirror like oil. Vranek the Pale, betrayer of tombs, caller of corpses, have you come to barter? Vranek stepped forward. Kaldrak loomed behind him, a hand resting lazily on the hilt of his immense blade. I seek the temples of the old ones in Lustria. The shard lies buried. You will show me the path? The mirror pulsed, and the surface shimmered. Faces appeared, hundreds pressed beneath the glass, screaming without sound. "Knowledge comes at cost. I am bound by pact and pain. You must feed me." Morntongue stepped forward, chittering through his centipede tongue. He presented a soul vessel, a twisted vial of onyx glass filled with screaming azure light. "Is this sufficient?" Vranek asked. The mirror laughed. The sound caused the ghouls to wail and dig their claws into the walls. A child's whimper. "I hunger for more. I want warriors, murderers, kings. Give me what I deserve." Vranek turned, gesturing to the ranks of the corpsebound. Without hesitation, he stepped to one of his revenants, once a noble knight of Bretonnia, his armor now a shell of rusted gilt, and tore the soul from his chest with a simple incantation. The ghost screamed as it was ripped free, swirling into a wailing ball of white flame. Another soul followed. A deck ghoul howled as its eyes burst, and its spirit was devoured by the sorcerer's grasp. Kaldrak, ever amused, drew his blade and impaled one of the skeletal helmsmen through the spine, twisting the weapon until the bones shattered. The ghost that rose from the crumbling corpse was weeping. Each soul was thrown into the mirror, one after the other. With each, the surface rippled and screamed, until finally, the cartographer appeared, a gaunt figure, translucent and rotted, materialized within the glass. He wore the tatters of an imperial navigator, his eyes gouged out and replaced by floating runes. His tongue had been cut, yet symbols of ink and flame danced across his lips as he began to etch the map from memory. His hands moved like wind over the mirror's surface. Lines formed in blood, in bone dust, in flickering green fire. Islands took shape. Serpent trails. Ruins carved like stars. Forbidden glyphs. Names that hurt the mind to read. He pointed, an obsidian dagger emerging from within the glass, and tapped a blinking symbol near a river delta of impossible geometry. Temple of the Star Serpent. The shard lies in its throat, but beware. The path is marked in vengeance. The map was seared into a hide parchment stitched from faces delivered by ghost hand from the glass. Vranek took it with reverence, his eyes glowing like furnaces. "You have served your purpose," he said. "And you have fed mine," the cartographer hissed. But as the crew turned to leave, the mirror trembled. One of the soul lanterns exploded and a shrieking wraith burst forth, its form twisted in agony. The cartographer had lied. He had kept a shard of the offering for himself, and now it sought vengeance. The wraith tore through the chamber like a cyclone of knives, ripping a ghoul in half, its entrails splashing across the bone-tiled floor. Another revenant lost his arm, black ichor spraying as the blade whirl passed through him. Kaldrak met the storm head-on. With a bellow like a falling tower, he leapt, cleaving the air with his demon blade. The strike caught the wraith mid-spin, slicing it in half. The spirit shrieked as it dissolved, the floor blackening where its essence bled out. The mirror cracked. "You dare!" the cartographer shrieked, face distorting. Vranek stepped forward and drove a dagger, carved from a sphinx's fang, into the mirror's surface. The glass shattered with a sound like children screaming, in reverse. The cartographer was gone. The mausoleum shook. But the map remained. They returned to the hollow rain, bloodied and victorious, the parchment crackling with forbidden magic. Lustria awaited, and the corpsebound sailed with purpose. Chapter 3. The Vampire Coast. The waters near the Vampire Coast were thick with decay, warmer than blood, denser than seawater, slick with the oil of centuries, old battles. The wind reeked of brine, sulfur, and the lingering tang of necromantic pollution. As the hollow rain carved its way through the filth-choked waves, even its undead crew grew restless. Specters moaned in their soul lanterns. The ghouls chittered and licked their claws nervously. The bones of the ship groaned louder than usual. Ahead, the coastline loomed, a wasteland of blackened swamps and twisted mangroves, each tree gnarled like a clutching claw. The remnants of shipwrecks littered the shore like broken teeth, their sails still flapping long after their crews had been devoured. Strange shapes moved between them, some tall and proud, armored in rust, others hunched and crawling, sniffing for marrow. This was the domain of the vampire coast, and worse still, the fiefdom of Stravik Varkul, the Strigoi beast warlord. A once noble bloodline lost to madness and hunger, the Strigoi were not like Vranek's kind. They were not regal nor subtle. They were feral things, monstrous, towering, bloated with stolen blood and powered by sheer brutality, and Stratva was their king in all but name. As the hollow rain approached the ruined harbor of Port Bloodreef, they were met not by emissaries, but by shrieks. From the coastal mist rose a flotilla of skeletal vessels, rafts, galleons, skiffs, all strung together with sinew and sailcloth, propelled by the oars of revenants and stitched together sea beasts. And at the heart of it, towering like a drowned cathedral, sailed the Maw Spire, Stravik's flagship, carved from the ribs of a sea dragon and crowned with cages filled with screaming mortals, their flesh torn by the wind. On the prows of his vassals stood ghoul captains, their eyes glowing red, their jaws distended in impossible angles. Vranek stood at the prow of the hollow rain, robes whipping like wings, his hand outstretched with the map of Lustria clenched tightly. "We do not come to war," he intoned, his voice booming across the water, carried by magic. "We seek passage only. Stand aside, and you may scavenge what we leave behind." "From atop the Maw Spire," Stravik answered. He did not speak. He roared. The sound was animal, like the mating cry of some deep thing. It shook the water. It made the revenants flinch. Kaldrak grinned. "So much for diplomacy," the Chaos Champion growled. And then the sea exploded. From the depths surged rotted leviathans, sea serpents with open rib cages and glowing runes carved into their flesh. Harpoons of bone and coral launched from Strigoi ships, crashing into the hollow rain's hull, sending ghouls flying in splashes of gore and severed limbs. Vranek hissed an incantation, raising a wall of ghost fire across the port side. Revenant archers loosed volleys of black-fletched arrows, each tip screaming as it flew. Ghoul swimmers leapt overboard, paddling toward enemy hulls with knives in their teeth and murder in their eyes. The boarding party struck. Strigoi warriors swarmed the deck, hulking, mutated horrors, their fingers tipped with claws as long as sabers, their jaws distending wide enough to bite off heads whole. One of them landed in a squelch, rising to its full height, mouth dripping red. Before it could move, Kaldrak charged. His daemon blade met flesh in an explosion of black blood and shrieking runes. The Strigoi tried to dodge, but Kaldrak's strike cleaved it in half from shoulder to hip. The body slumped apart, steaming, intestines flopping onto the deck like wet ropes. Elsewhere, Morn Tongue hurled a jar of screaming bile onto the boards. It burst in a cloud of yellow smoke, and 3 Strigoi ghouls began clawing at their own eyes, melting from the inside out. One collapsed, twitching, as beetles burst from his stomach. Above, Sorvath steered the ship with preternatural calm, even as fireballs of green warp flame hurtled across the sky, impacting with thunderous eruptions. The mast was shattered. Ghouls burned and ran screaming into the sea. But the hollow rain gave as good as she got. Isher, the banshee bound to the mirror, was unleashed. Deal with it. Her screams split the sky. half-dozen enemy crew dropped dead on the spot, their skulls imploding, eyes and brains vaporized into red mist. The echo of her wail shattered 3 enemy sails, sending rigging and timbers crashing onto screeching strigoi beasts below. And yet, it wasn't enough. The maw spire rammed their flank. Wood cracked. The figurehead of the hollow rain screamed in agony as her body split down the middle. Strakek himself leapt aboard. He was 10 feet tall, a mass of muscle and filth, his skin gray and thick like rhinoceros hide. His face was barely humanoid, sunken eyes, a maw full of fangs, a nose rotted away. He landed with a quake, his clawed hands already reaching. Vranek stepped forward, hands ablaze with necrotic energy. "You will not stop my purpose, beast." Stravek laughed, a sound like a grave opening. Then he lunged. The two collided in a burst of black magic and brute force. Vranek's spells tore chunks of flesh from Stravek, but the warlord fought like a berserk god. He grabbed Vranek by the throat, lifting him high. Kaldrak intervened, slamming into Strakek's side with a shoulder charge that dented bone. His blade swung up, catching the warlord under the arm, drawing a gout of dark ichor. Strakek roared and hurled Vranek into the mast, cracking it down the middle. The mast began to fall. Ishra screamed again, but Stravek powered through it, striking Kaldrak with both fists. The Chaos Warrior flew back into a wall of revenants, who crumpled under his armored bulk. And Vranek stood. Blood leaped from his mouth. His spine was cracked, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. He whispered a name. Not his own, not Stravek's. A true name. One of the old words. And the sea beneath the moss spire boiled. From the depths rose a hand, a skeletal colossus, 10 times larger than any man. It gripped the moss spire and pulled. Wood cracked. Souls screamed. The ship groaned as it was dragged down, down, into the abyss. Stravek turned, roaring, but it was too late. The ocean swallowed his fleet whole. Silence fell. Only the hollow rain remained, damaged, smoldering, blood-slick, but afloat. Kaldrak limped to Vranek's side, face bloodied, armor cracked. "Well," he rasped, "that was fun." Vranek said nothing. He simply looked toward the south, toward where the stars grew denser, hotter, stranger. Toward Lustria. The dead had fought the dead, and the path was now clear. Chapter 4. Jungle of Screams. Lustria did not welcome the corpsebound. The coastline was a jagged scar of black sand and twisted mangroves, the trees hunching like watchers, their roots writhing through the mud like grasping hands. The humidity was oppressive, a fetid cloak that clung to flesh and bone alike, thick with rot and the stench of death. Even the undead felt it, not in their lungs but in their bones, as if the land itself sought to burrow into them, to reclaim them, to digest them slowly. So is the land itself sought to burrow into them, to reclaim them, to digest them slowly. The hollow rain had run aground on a reef of skull-white coral, its keel cracked, her hull bleeding tar-like ichor into the shallows. The revenants and ghouls sloshed ashore in silence, weapons drawn, heads on a swivel. Sorvath remained aboard to repair the ship with lashings of necromantic tar and bone bindings. Vranek, cloaked in shrouds of whispering shadow, led the rest inland. They passed beneath trees that oozed yellow sap and swayed without wind. The canopy blotted out the sky, casting everything in a twilight gloom. Insects buzzed in clouds, many larger than fists, their wings iridescent, their stingers glistening with venom that hissed upon contact with metal. A single bite caused one of the deck ghouls to convulse, froth, and explode. His body ruptured from within by wriggling spawn. They moved cautiously, slashing through vines that bled black, hacking at flowers with human teeth at their centers. Morn-tongue muttered wards as he walked, his centipede tongue twitching, painting runes on the trunks of trees that screamed when marked. And then the hallucinations began. It started with whispers, barely perceptible at first, like breath through dry leaves. Then came the faces. Faces in the bark, faces in the mist, weeping, screaming, laughing. Ghouls began to claw at their eyes. One revenant turned and attacked his own reflection in a pool of stagnant water, slashing until he opened his own throat. Kaldrak, immune to madness but not to irritation, snapped the neck of a shrieking corpse ghoul who began giggling uncontrollably. Vranek pressed on. The jungle was alive, not in the way of nature, but with ancient psychic residue. The old ones had walked here, left their mark in the ley lines, in the stones, in the very air. Even the undead could not pass untouched. Suddenly, the ground shook. Not a tremor, but a rhythm, a drumbeat. Vranek raised his hand. The corpsebound froze. From the foliage ahead came the unmistakable sound of scaled flesh moving in unison. Heavy footfalls, the rustle of foliage displaced by cold precision. Then they saw them. Skink scouts, eyes glowing with turquoise light darting through the trees. Their blowpipes were silent but lethal, firing darts tipped with venom that didn't kill, it froze. One ghoul collapsed mid-leap, his flesh crystallizing in seconds, his scream locked forever in a frozen grimace. Behind them strode Saurus warriors, hulking reptilian titans with obsidian blades and shields covered in star metal glyphs. Each step was a challenge to existence. The jungle exploded into violence. Kaldrak met the charge with a bellow, swinging his demon blade in wide arcs. It crashed into the first Saurus with bone-shattering force, splitting the creature's chest open in a fan of gore. The Saurus fought on despite the wound, impaling Kaldrak through the thigh with a jagged spear before being decapitated by the return swing. Vranek unleashed tendrils of soul flame, green and flickering, that clung to flesh and spirit alike. One skink screeched as his eyes boiled, his soul sucked from his body and devoured mid-air by a floating maw of bone. Warn-tongue released a cloud of corpse fog, a noxious green mist filled with whispering mouths that gnawed at the living. The skinks cried out in their tongue, firing wildly into the haze, only to vanish one by one, their bones falling clattering to the roots below. A Saurus alpha twice the size of the others charged Vranek directly. Its blade was carved from celestial stone, glowing with golden glyphs. It moved with unnatural speed, slashing low, aiming to sever Vranek's legs. Vranek teleported a hair's breadth away, reappearing behind the creature with a spear of spine-glass in his hand. He rammed it into the Saurus's exposed back, through scales, through ribs, piercing the second heart these beasts possessed. The creature groaned and collapsed, its blood a thick amber syrup. But the jungle did not relent. The battle raged for hours. When it was done, the ground was slick with gore, layered in blood both red and blue. Bones jutted from the soil like saplings. Smoke curled from burned foliage, and the psychic fog lifted, though the air still pulsed with ancient judgment. Only half of the corpse-bound remained. Vranek looked around, his gaunt face expressionless. Ghouls feasted on lizardmen corpses, their claws drenched in viscera. Kaldrak leaned on his sword, bleeding black from multiple wounds, his grin wide despite it all. "This place hates us," the champion muttered. "And should," Vranek replied. He unrolled the map of skulls, its cursed parchment pulsing with fresh blood drawn by the proximity to the ancient wards. They were close now, the glyphs aligned with the stars overhead, revealing the path. A temple awaited, buried deep in the screaming heart of the jungle, and the shard of Nagash's crown awaited within. But Lustria would not surrender it without a fight. Chapter 5. The Temple Guardians. The jungle parted to reveal it, half buried, choked in vines and centuries of rot, yet still exuding power like heat from a furnace. The temple of the Star Serpent loomed above the clearing, its stone ziggurat carved with impossible precision, every glyph humming with dormant divinity. The jungle dared not grow too close to its base. Even nature seemed wary of treading on the sacred stones of the old ones. Vranek the Pale stood at the front of the Corpsebound, his robes soaked in ichor and jungle filth, the map of skulls curled in one hand, glowing faintly in the glyph light. Behind him, Kaldrak leaned on his daemon blade, his armor cracked and blood-caked, one eye swollen shut. The remaining ghouls hissed and frothed, their movements erratic from weeks of jungle madness. The revenants, those who hadn't succumbed to the hallucinations or Saurus blades, stood silent, weapons at the ready. The temple's outer steps were lined with petrified corpses. Hundreds of skinks, saurus, and even cold-blooded monsters, their eyes wide with final horror, their bodies frozen in twisted poses of flight. Some were fused with the stone itself, as if the temple had absorbed them. At the summit stood a gateway of jade, inscribed with a star sigil that bled green light like a slow wound. "This is it," Vranek whispered. "The outer sanctum." Kaldrak nodded and stepped forward. The moment his boot touched the lowest step, the earth shuddered. A deep, grinding moan echoed from beneath the stones, followed by the shriek of shifting mechanisms older than empires. The vines tore away from the base of the temple, revealing a vast stone chamber, a vault sunken into the earth, sealed until now. Its walls pulsed with dormant energy, veins of warp-infused gold flickering to life. Then, the sound of breaking stone. Something enormous stirred in the shadows. It stepped into view with the slow, deliberate menace of inevitability. A Croxigor, but not flesh. This was no living guardian. It was a construct, a golem of jade, obsidian, and celestial bronze. Twice the height of a man, it moved like a boulder given rage. Its tail bristled with barbs of star metal. Its eyes glowed a steady, hateful blue. The temple guardian. It raised a hammer the size of a sarcophagus and charged. The first revenant it struck didn't die. He ceased. The hammer came down, and there was no spray of blood, no crunch of bone, only red mist and fragments of armor. The revenant was atomized in an instant. The ghouls leapt forward, shrieking, tearing at its legs. Their claws scraped uselessly against ancient armor. One was caught mid-pounce by the tail, impaled through the chest, lifted screaming into the air, then hurled against the ziggurat wall with enough force to explode. Morn-tongue hissed and cast a fog of agony, green smoke filled with biting, spectral mouths. The construct walked through it unfazed, the mouths bursting into sparks against its enchanted plating. Kaldrak roared, blade raised. He met the guardian head-on, his daemon weapon shrieking with hunger. Their first clash echoed like a thunderclap. Kaldrak's blade bit deep into the construct's shoulder, carving through 2 inches of bronze before stopping with a jolt. The Croxigor responded with a backhand swing that caught Kaldrak full in the chest, sending him tumbling down the steps, his breastplate crumpled, ribs shattered. Vranek asked after. His hands wove ancient sigils into the air, tearing a hole in reality. Through it poured a swarm of soul-flame wraiths, ghostly serpents forged of wrath and malice, each one diving into the guardian's joints, biting, burning, screaming. For a moment, the construct faltered. That was all Vranek needed. He unleashed the chant of 13 hungers, a spell so vile the jungle itself recoiled. It summoned a dozen grasping arms from the underworld, blackened, skeletal things wrapped in barbed chains. They erupted from the earth beneath the guardian, clutching at its legs, binding it in place. Kaldrak, bloody and broken, rose with a snarl and charged again. This time, his blade found the gap between shoulder and neck, an ancient seam in the construct's armor. The demon blade sank deep, and the creature let out a noise like cracking mountains. Elder twisted. The guardian shuddered and broke apart. It collapsed in pieces, jade shards tumbling like rubble down the steps, its inner light flickering and dying. One final breath of warp energy escaped its shattered core, blowing back Vranek's robes and scorching the stone. Silence. Only the drip of blood, the crackle of dying magic. Vranek approached the sundered body, stepping over corpses, his own and the enemy's, and laid a hand on the fallen construct. "Your gods failed you," he whispered. "Mine do not forget." He turned to the jade gateway. It no longer glowed, it burned, its surface flickering with lines of active glyphs. The binding was broken. The outer sanctum was unlocked. He raised the map of skulls, now thrumming violently in his grip. The way forward had been bought with blood, and the shard of Nagash's crown waited just beyond the door. Chapter 6. Sigils of the Old Ones. The gateway opened not with noise, but with pressure, as if reality held its breath. Beyond the jade archway lay a long corridor, its floor paved with obsidian tiles etched in gold. Each tile shimmered with arcane light, symbols dancing like insects in a sunbeam. The walls were lined with carvings in an unknown tongue, pictoglyphs of saurian gods and star-wrought catastrophes. Tales told through geometry and madness. As the corpsebound stepped through, the air thickened, not with moisture or heat, but with intellect. This was not a place of spirit or faith. It was a sanctum of design, of precise terror. The Old Ones had built this temple not just to guard something sacred, but to test any who dared seek it. Vranek walked first, the map of skulls glowing violently in his hand. The parchment curled in his grip like it was in pain. The first trap revealed itself when a revenant stepped on the wrong sigil. The floor split beneath his feet instantly. A blade, thin as thought and sharp enough to cut truth from fiction, erupted from the ground and bisected him from groin to crown. The two halves of his armored body fell, twitching to either side, spraying black ichor across the nearest wall. Then the floor returned, seamless once more. The corridor pulsed. Glyphs lit up along the floor, dozens of them, pulsing in different colors, arranged in a pattern none could easily grasp. Vranek narrowed his eyes. A logic sequence. They're testing perception, pattern, memory, consequence. Kaldrak growled, leaning on his cracked blade. Or they're just killing everything stupid enough to walk on them. He wasn't wrong. A ghoul leapt forward, ignoring Vranek's gesture to halt. It landed on a red-lit tile. Immediately the air screamed. A force field of blazing turquoise light ignited around the ghoul. It floated, thrashing wildly, then imploded, crushed into a ball of mewling meat and cracking bones no larger than a man's skull. Blood ran in slow rivulets across the tile. Vranek raised both hands, focusing. From his fingers spilled filaments of spectral thought, magic woven into the air itself. The glyphs responded, changing color, shifting shape. Some turned green, others blinked red, then gold, then vanished altogether. Sweat poured from Vranek's brow, a rare thing for the undead. Each step must be earned. Their keys: language, equation, sacrifice. He pointed to 3 tiles, purple, orange, then silver. Follow only these, the others are death. One by one they crossed. A single misstep by a ghoul resulted in a bolt of starfire from the ceiling, reducing it to ash with a thunderclap. But the rest reached the end, where a new chamber waited. It was circular, grand, and wrong. The walls rotated slowly, like a massive gear. Each section bore a mural, constellations twisted into labyrinths, beasts with too many eyes, towering reptilian forms in communion with the sky. At the center stood a stone plinth, topped with a sphere, a perfect orb of glowing crystal, floating a foot above its base, humming with endless energy. The moment Vranek entered, the doors sealed behind them. "This is a fail-safe," he muttered. They knew someone would make it this far. As he approached the sphere, it cracked open, splitting like an egg into 6 petals of light. From within, a tendril of magic lashed out and struck him in the chest. He staggered. "They're reading me." Blood, his blood, the old cursed kind, began to run from his nose, eyes, mouth. The glyphs around the room brightened. They were not inert symbols, they were alive. They were judging. The sphere spoke, not in words, but in pure thought. "In the worthy may pass. Prove comprehension, prove devotion, prove sacrifice." Another tendril lashed out, striking his forehead. Memories surfaced, screams, fire, betrayal. The moment he was turned, the moment he murdered his own sire. He howled, dropping to one knee. Kaldrak stepped forward, blade raised. "Whatever that thing is, I can break it." "No," Vranek snarled. "It must be solved. This place is not ruled by strength." He turned back to the sphere. "You want sacrifice? Then take it." Vranek bit his own wrist, deep, and bled into the air. Then, speaking the name he had sworn never to utter again, he severed a portion of his own soul. A scream, not his voice but something higher, ripped from his mouth as his spectral essence poured from his body like smoke. The chamber shook, the murals bled light, the orb flared, then folded inward and vanished. The wall stopped moving. The door ahead unsealed. Vranek fell, coughing black ichor, his skin graying further, his eyes dimming. Kaldrak caught him before he collapsed entirely. "You better not be dying. I'm not dragging your pale ass through another mile of jungle." Vranek smiled weakly. "Not yet." Ahead, the path led downward, into the heart of the temple. Whatever awaited them beyond this point was more than test or trap. It was purpose. The shard was near. The air tasted of it, and the old ones were watching. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. The air grew heavier the deeper they went. No longer hot and fetid, but thick, as though each breath must be chewed, swallowed. The walls pulsed with dim blue light, veins of crystal webbed like capillaries through the ancient stone. The glyphs no longer shimmered, they watched. And the air was full of whispers. Not from the old ones. These were his. Vranek staggered for the first time in centuries. The soul he had torn from himself still howled within his mind, a ragged wound in his essence. Kaldrak noticed but said nothing, only tightened his grip on his blade and continued forward, the crunch of his boots echoing. But for Vranek, the corridor warped. He was no longer in Lustria, no longer surrounded by ghouls and revenants. He walked halls of marble, white and gold, where banners of the collegiate arcane once fluttered in the wind. Altdorf, a life ago, a world ago. He saw himself, young, arrogant, brilliant, Vranek the human, Vranek the seer, blessed by the winds of Shyish. A necromancer of unparalleled promise, courted by nobles, feared by rivals. He walked with a straight back and bright eyes, alive with purpose. Then came the invitation. The Necrarchs, ancient, twisted, and brilliant beyond mortal reckoning. They offered immortality not in blood, but in knowledge. Secrets never meant for man. He accepted. The transformation was agony. His flesh boiled, eyes wept pus, bones cracked, twisted, reformed. his veins filled with cold, intelligent hunger. He emerged not a man reborn, but a thing, mind intact, soul altered, flesh ruined. But it was not the pain that broke him. It was the betrayal. He saw their faces now, those Necrarchs who stood in a circle, whispering as he writhed. Sejan the Arch-Lich, smiling as he bound Vranek's soul to a shard of warp glass. Belanok, who carved the runes into Vranek's heart that would bind him to servitude. They had no intention of making him one of them. He was to be a tool, a pawn to carry scrolls into vaults too dangerous for the old ones to risk. He served them for a century, digging up gods, binding star demons, whispering to the dead in languages that killed the tongue, until he broke his chains. He remembered it in perfect clarity. Caesaron asleep in a coffin of burning silver, Vranek whispering a spell laced with lies, the tomb exploding with reversed entropy. Time ran backward for Caesaron, and he screamed like a newborn as his body reverted to dust. Belanok's death was slower. Vranek had sealed his mouth shut with bone, then opened his own veins, and bled knowledge into the traitor's eyes until the truth drove him mad. The old lich wandered into the warp and never returned. From that moment, Vranek was free, but freedom brought purpose. Not revenge on the Necrarchs. They were dust and echoes. He would destroy the source of their gift, the rot in reality, the foul, brilliant god who had birthed undeath, Nagash. Not through war, not through petty rebellion, but through annihilation of legacy. He would claim the shard, and with it unravel Nagash's work from the inside. Every whispered spell, every artifact, every grave echo would crumble. The great necromancer's will would become ash. The vision faded. He stumbled forward, catching himself against a wall. Kaldrekt glanced over his shoulder. "You were talking. I was remembering. You said her name." Vranek went still. In the distance, something shifted. The walls shimmered. The temple had heard. Yes, Lariel, another ghost. The last memory of warmth in his dead chest. She had walked with him once, a scholar of Hysh, radiant and fierce. She believed he could turn back from the dark, that he could become more than what they made him. The Necrarchs ripped her apart before his eyes, her soul shattered and scattered across cursed ley lines, just to watch him scream. It was the last sound his lungs had ever made from pain. And well, he didn't seek to resurrect her. He sought to avenge her, not with blood, but with oblivion. He would unmake death itself. The shard was the first piece. Vranek straightened. The visions retreated. The whispers quieted. Kaldrekt nodded once, as if something unspoken passed between them. The others stirred, ghouls sniffing, revenants twitching. Ahead, the final door of the sanctum glowed. The shard was close now. And behind Vranek's dead eyes, something ancient began to burn. Not vengeance, not power, a funeral pyre for the gods themselves. Chapter 8. The Fang of Sotek. The sanctum threshold yawned open like the mouth of some forgotten beast, jagged with glyph-carved stone teeth. The corpsebound descended into a vast subterranean hall beneath the temple, where the very air trembled with tension. Ancient stone columns soared into gloom above, each etched with spiraling depictions of a great serpent, slaying the stars and devouring the sun. Braziers flickered to life of their own accord, casting green light across murals of Sotek, the serpent god, coiled in apocalyptic glory, his jaws clamped around the throats of daemons and men alike. The chamber was circular, with a sunken arena at its heart, surrounded by staggered tiers of stone that formed an unnatural amphitheater. The far wall shimmered with magic, an enormous relief of a coiled serpent whose eyes wept molten gold, its scales embedded with raw warpstone shards. At its center, embedded in the beast's open mouth, glowed the shard. Vranek stopped at the precipice of the arena, eyes locked on his prize. Kaldrak beside him grunted. Too easy. As if the words were a trigger, a chorus of screeches echoed from above. Dozens of them, masked in gold and bone, flooded into the balconies above, their tiny hands gripping obsidian daggers and staves crackling with divine energy. They did not attack, they chanted. Low, guttural, rhythmic. The chamber thrummed. The serpent mural's eyes flared to life, and with a grinding of ancient gears, the floor of the arena split apart. Stone gave way to darkness, and from it rose a mass of scales and sinew, dragged upward by chains of living jade. It screamed before it fully emerged, a sound not made by any natural throat. The avatar of Sotek. It was enormous, a snake with a head like a dragon's skull, crowned in bronze and gold. Its body was plated in natural armor the color of oxidized blood, pulsating with glyphs that shone like stars. Its eyes glowed with cruel intelligence. Twin tongues lashed from its fanged maw. The stench of ancient magic and venom flooded the chamber. With a hiss that split the air, the serpent lunged. Its jaws snapped down, engulfing a ghoul mid-shriek. Bone crunched, blood sprayed. The monster's tail whipped outward, slamming a cluster of revenants into the far wall with such force they burst apart like sacks of wet meat. Kaldrak met it with a roar, leaping from the steps and plunging his demon blade into its side. The blade bit deep, black oika sprang across his armor, but the serpent writhed and coiled, twisting around him like a constrictor. Bones cracked audibly beneath its crushing coils. Kaldrak howled, blood foaming at his mouth. From the balcony's skinks cast down divine sigils, blazing discs of light that carved through the air like chakrams. One slammed into a ghoul's face, slicing his skull clean in half. Another severed a revenant's arm, which twitched and crawled like a dying insect across the stones. Morn Tongue hurled curses from the steps. His centipede tongue screamed forbidden syllables that melted stone, warping the air. A black beam of necrotic power struck the serpent's flank, burning away scales and searing a crater into its flesh, but the beast did not fall. It shrieked and vomited forth a tide of venomous leeches, which surged across the floor, burying themselves in the skin of anything nearby. A ghoul tore open his own chest trying to dig one out. Another fell screaming as his bones were sucked dry from within, skin collapsing in on itself like punctured leather. Vranek stepped forward. His hands burned with spectral flame, his voice rising in a tongue so old it predated language. He cast the threnody of hollow stars. 3 burning orbs of pure anti-life erupted from his fingertips and lanced into the serpent's skull. The creature howled as its mind was flayed, its will screaming against the presence of Nagash legacy. It thrashed wildly, smashing apart pillars, burying 2 skinks beneath rubble. One half-crushed ghoul clung to its throat and bit deep before being shaken off, his body flying like refuse into the arena wall with a wet splatter. Kaldrak, broken but burning with hate, rose once more. He drove his blade again into the beast's eye, twisting, shoving with all his might until the socket burst and black flame erupted from the wound. The serpent coiled upward, shrieking, its massive body flailing and shattering the arena's stonework. A final blast from Vranek, raw soul energy wrapped in necrotic entropy, struck the serpent's underbelly. Flesh tore, blood, thick and green, rained across the chamber. The avatar gave a final, choked hiss, slumped forward, and collapsed into a twitching heap of godflesh and steam. The skinks wailed, then fled, scattering into hidden tunnels. Silence returned, punctuated only by the drip of ichor and the moans of the dying. Half the remaining corpse-bound lay dead, shredded or melted. Kaldrak dropped to one knee, breathing heavily, blood pouring from a dozen wounds. "That was not a snake." Vranek ignored him. He approached the serpent's corpse. The shard of Nagash's crown now glowed brighter than ever, its pull immense, its whispers undeniable. The way was open, but the temple had not given up its prize willingly. It had demanded blood and been paid in full. Chapter 9. The Chamber of the Shard. The doors to the inner sanctum opened with a hiss that sounded more like breath than stone. Ancient mechanisms ground against each other, reluctant to yield even now, their glyph-lined frames exhaling centuries of stale, cursed air. Beyond the threshold lay the Chamber of the Shard, a vast, circular expanse hollowed from obsidian and veined with veins of pulsing warpstone, alive with a heartbeat that did not belong to anything natural. The chamber felt wrong, not in sight nor sound, but in essence, like a room carved into the fabric of being, where time folded in strange spirals and gravity tugged just a little too hard toward the center. At its heart, the shard of Nagash's crown floated above a twisted plinth of fused bone and black crystal. It spun slowly, weightless, a jagged fragment of obsidian etched with blasphemous runes that writhed and reformed as the eye struggled to follow them. Pale green fire licked its edges, and shadows bent toward it, not away, as they should. The corpse-bound hesitated. Even the ghouls, feral and fearless, hung back. Their tongues flicked nervously. Their clawed feet refused the stone. It was alive. Not just a fragment of power, not just a relic. A will. A hungry, whispering godshard. Vranek stepped closer, sweat bubbling on his pallid brow despite his undead flesh. The closer he got, the louder it became, not in his ears, but in his mind. Words, voices, promises, all layered atop one another like silk soaked in blood. "I see you, Pale One. I know your hunger. I know your hate. I can feed it. I can end it." His fingers trembled. Behind him, Morntongue staggered. The ghoul priest shrieked and fell to his knees, his centipede tongue writhing violently as if strangling itself. He began to sob, a sound he should not be able to make. "Lariel lives," the shard whispered. "In the cracks between death and dream. Take me, Vranek, and I will return her." Kaldrak grunted, staring at the shard with a sneer. "It's lying." But even he couldn't look away. His daemon blade trembled in his grip, its runes hissing like wounded animals. The shard turned its voice on him next. "Kaldrak the Harrowed, betrayed by gods, broken by fate, I offer vengeance. Real vengeance, not petty slaughter, world-ending rage. Bow to me, and I will make you a god of war, beyond chaos, beyond death." Kaldrak bared his teeth, veins bulging, eyes twitching. He took a step forward, then another. Vranek turned sharply, eyes blazing. "No." Kaldrak stopped. His muscles locked. For a moment silence passed between them, tension like a string drawn too tight. Then a scream shattered it. One of the remaining ghouls lunged for the shard, frothing at the mouth, babbling in forgotten tongues. The moment its claws touched the plinth, the room exploded in light. But it wasn't light, it was unmaking. The ghoul froze mid-leap. His body flayed itself open, skin peeling away, bones unraveling like scrolls of meat. His soul was sucked into the shard with a sickening wet gulp, the runes flaring as it absorbed every shred of him. And then it pulsed. A wave of raw necromantic force slammed outward. Morntongue was thrown against the wall, bones breaking audibly. A revenant burst into blue flame, howling as his spirit was ripped from his shell. The remaining ghouls collapsed, bleeding from their eyes, their minds shattered by the flood of temptation and terror. Only Kaldrak and Vranek remained standing. The shard hovered before them, closer now, though it had not moved. Its voice deepened, reverberating through the stone. "Take me, Pale One. You have earned it. You passed every trial, spilled blood enough to drown gods. Grip me, and the world is yours. Nagash's throne will burn, his legacy obliterated, and in the ashes you will stand alone, free." Vranek reached out. His fingers hovered just above its surface. For one heartbeat he wanted it, not as a tool, not as a weapon, but as an end. A release. Power beyond reckoning. Control beyond death. Lariel's voice, tender and sweet, echoed inside his mind. A recalled feeling of, "Come back to me." He hesitated, and in that hesitation he remembered who he was. Not a conqueror, not a savior, a ruin. A wound that walked. His hand closed around the shard, and the world screamed. The power flowed through him like molten glass, agony so vast it became purity. His body burned from within. His soul thrashed in his ribs. For a moment he saw everything, every soul that had ever died, every thought Nagash had ever dreamed, every scream ever loosed into the void. And in that instant, Vranek understood. The shard was not just alive, it was Nagash, a fragment of the god's will, watching, waiting, seeding his influence, a cancer that chose its carriers. Vranek released it. He stumbled back, hand blackened and smoking. The shard hovered where it had been, pulsing softly. It did not speak again, but it knew him now. And he knew it. Kaldrak stepped beside him, silent, blood trickling from his ears. "You didn't take it." "Not yet," Vranek rasped, and the room shivered around them. They had found the shot, but what they had awakened was far greater, and it would not rest. Chapter 10. The Betrayer Within. The echoes of the shard's whispers had barely faded when the chamber trembled with a new tension, one not born of ancient gods or cursed magic, but betrayal. Vranek stood in the silence, his hand still smoldering from the brief contact with the shard. Blackened flesh peeled from his fingertips like charred parchment, revealing glistening bone beneath. He said nothing, only stared into the fragment's pulsing core as if daring it to speak again. Behind him, Kaldrak stepped forward. Each footfall was heavy, deliberate. The demon blade in his hand, so often relaxed, casual in his grip, was now clutched tightly, its edge humming with anticipation. The runes carved into its obsidian length flickered with feverish red light, whispering in a voice only Kaldrak could hear. "It should have been me." Vranek turned slowly, eye narrowed. "You'll have to speak louder than the shard if you want me to listen." Kaldrak stopped mere feet from him. His face was shadowed, blood trailing down his ruined cheek, mixing with the ichor of slain serpent and shattered magic. But his eyes burned, not with madness, but clarity. "I fought through the jungle. I bled for your vision, tore the heads off god things, crushed stars beneath my heel." He raised the demon blade, pointing it toward the floating shard. "I earned that power, not you. You cling to pain like its purpose." Branek's lip curled. "And you cling to ambition like a drowning man to a corpse." Kaldrak's laugh was hollow. "Don't pretend you didn't know. I was a champion of chaos. The gods still whispered to me. Do you think I've followed you across jungle and death and madness for redemption? I followed you to this piece of Nagash, the ladder to my godhood. The blade's runes flared. From its edge spilled embers of reality-warping fire, warping the air around it. Fated, I can shed this rotted shell, restore my mortal form, not as a man, not as a vampire, but as a daemon prince, a war god reborn in flesh and madness. Not even Nagash will stand before me. Vranek did not move. You never believed in the plan, he said softly. You saw the end, but not the reason. Kaldrak sneered. I saw clearly. You think revenge on death is purpose. I say dominate it. If the gods curse you, become their equal. If fate damns you, damn it back with flame and steel. With a roar, Kaldrak lunged. The demon blade came down in an arc designed to kill, not maim. To end. But Vranek was not caught unaware. He twisted, shadows spilling from his cloak like living serpents. The blade sliced through smoke and darkness, missing by inches. Vranek countered with a blast of pure entropy, dark light crashing into Kaldrak's chest, sending him staggering back with a snarl, armor melting, flesh hissing. But Kaldrak laughed. His bones cracked and reformed mid-step. His veins surged with warp energy, boiling blood roaring through his corrupted heart. You cannot kill me, corpse. Not here, not with him watching. He gestured to the shard which pulsed brighter, feeding off the rising violence. Kaldrak charged again, this time too fast to avoid. The blade struck Vranek's side. Bone cracked, blood sprayed. The Necrarch reeled, hissing, his left arm hanging limp, useless. He responded by summoning a swarm of razor-fanged spirits, wraiths that shrieked and tore at Kaldrak's mind, biting, clawing, screaming. Kaldrak roared, swatting them aside, his body aflame with demonic fire. He grabbed Vranek by the throat and lifted him, feet dangling above the stone. You are a means, not an end. The demon blade pressed against Vranek's heart. Then, let go. The voice didn't come from either of them. It came from the shard. Kadura froze. The blade in his hand trembled. Let go, Kaldrak, it whispered again, more seductively this time. You don't need him. Take me. Bind me. Ascend. You were always meant to be more. His grip slackened, and that was all Vranek needed. With a scream of hate and stolen power, he raised his good hand and tore the soul from Kaldrak's chest. The demon blade fell to the floor with a shriek. Kaldrak staggered backward, clutching his chest, his mouth open in silent shock as his essence, half mortal, half demon, all hate, was dragged into a floating sphere of withered energy, bound in chains of bone. His body convulsed, twitched, began to crack. You were never going to become a god, Vranek said, voice like iron dipped in acid. You were a hammer, and your time is done. Kaldrak's final scream tore through the sanctum as his form collapsed inward, flesh boiling, armor crumpling, soul caged and screaming within Vranek's hand. Silence fell. Only the shard remained, hovering, pulsing, watching. Vranek stood over the crumpled remains of his once ally. I do not need worship, I do not need dominion, I need only vengeance. And the shard purred in approval. Chapter 11. Shard Unleashed. The chamber stood still, bloody, scorched, and steeped in the echoes of Kaldrak's final scream. His armor lay in twisted heaps, his bones scattered in molten fragments, and his soul, caged, bound, and howling, throbbed in the spectral orb Vranek now held in his withered hand. But the shard pulsed louder. With Kaldrak dead, something in the air shifted. A pressure, a crack, like the splitting of a great dam holding back a sea of corpses. The shard floated higher, spinning faster, its light deepening into an impossible hue, not green, not black, but the color of unbeing. And then it spoke. Not in words, not even in whispers. It screamed. The sound came from inside the skull, pure thought, pure hunger. The shard ignited mid-air, lashing out with tendrils of dark lightning, each crackling with ancient necromantic energy. The nearest revenant was struck instantly, his body convulsed, eyes popping like crushed grapes, limbs flailing in an impossible rhythm before exploding in a mist of ichor and bone shards. Morntongue tried to raise a ward, but the shard's fury sundered it. A bolt of raw undeath struck him in the chest, and his ribcage inverted, crushing his organs, splitting him open like a cracked gourd. His centipede tongue spasmed, shrieked, then curled inward and vanished into his own throat, before he collapsed in a puddle of black slime. Vranek fell to one knee. It's awakening. The shard's light expanded, engulfing the room. The walls pulsed. Glyphs, etched by the old ones for countless ages, sparked and shattered, their divine geometries no longer sufficient to contain what was now stirring. Above them, the serpent murals twisted. Stone hissed and peeled like skin. Carvings came alive, writhing across the walls, screaming in the voices of those who had built this place and failed to entomb the fragment of Nagash's will. The shard released a pulse, not an explosion, but a wave of erasure. 3 more revenants disintegrated, their spirits yanked into the shard like water down a drain. Ghouls clawed their own faces off to silence the voices now screaming through their minds. One began laughing hysterically, tearing at his chest until he exposed his heart, which he pulled out and held to the shard like a supplicant offering. The temple itself responded. Massive tremors shook the sanctum. Above, slabs of ancient stone fell like thunderclaps, crushing the dead and the dying. Portals carved in golden glyphs burst open, releasing floods of emerald light and reanimated temple guardians, constructs of scale and star metal, now burning with necrotic fire. Statues crumbled and rose again, not as stone but as bone, animated by the same force that had been trapped within the shard for millennia. The temple complex, once dormant, was now fully alive and furious. Vranek staggered to his feet, his body crackling with backlash magic. His robes hung in tatters, his flesh blistered and glowing where the shard's aura had touched him. The floor of the sanctum began to crack. A chasm opened at the center, splitting the plinth in 2. From it poured black fire, and within the fire Vranek saw visions. Nagash, towering and robed in shadow, laughing across time. Cities burning beneath black suns. Mirror, his own reflection, grinning with sharpened teeth and hollow eyes. You wanted freedom, Vranek, the shard boomed, now clearly sentient. You earned this gift. You unlocked me. From within the flame, arms began to rise. Soul arms, the grasping limbs of every spirit the shard had devoured since time immemorial. They clawed at reality, reaching toward Vranek. He raised both hands. I did not come to worship, he snarled. I came to destroy you. He drew upon his last reserves, blood from his mouth, soul from his bones. He whispered the reversal sigil, a spell meant never to be spoken. The glyphs lit upon his chest, carved there by the Necrarchs long ago, began to bleed. But the shard surged again. It released one final detonation, a starburst of annihilation that ripped through the sanctum like wildfire. The last of the ghouls were vaporized. Their shadows were burned into the walls for a heartbeat before being sucked into the heart of the shard. The reanimated constructs shattered as the energy boiled their animating glyphs into slag. And far above, the very roof of the temple split, a column of black light erupting into the sky, visible for miles through the canopy of Lustria. The jungle howled in response. Distant beasts screamed. Skinks fled their ruins. Even the slan on distant thrones turned their sight to the unholy beacon now piercing their sacred lands. The temple was no longer a tomb. It was a wound, a raw, bleeding portal of death made manifest. And Vranek, alone in the shattered remains of his crew, stared at the shard as it hovered above the chasm, glowing brighter, whispering louder, becoming... Nagash's dream had stirred, and the world would never sleep again. Chapter 12. Flight Through Ruin. The temple roared around them, a sound not of crumbling stone or falling ruin, but of awakening judgment. The gods of the Old Ones had not slept through the desecration. They had watched, and now they acted. The chamber that had held the shard was a corpse. The air was saturated with soul ash, the walls scorched by necrotic pulses, and the floor a cracked battlefield strewn with the remains of the corpsebound. Morntung's corpse lay blackened and burst, his centipede tongue still twitching, scorched into the stone like a twisted sigil. But Vranek still stood, wounded, alone, carrying the impossible. The shard of Nagash now hovered behind him, tethered to his spine by spectral chains of soul matter. It pulsed with a dark heartbeat, feeding on his essence, whispering sweet heresies into his mind. It offered power, revenge, apotheosis. He didn't listen. He commanded. With a wave of one bloodied hand, he summoned what little remained of his forces. 3 revenants, half-shattered but still bound to his will, staggered from the shadows of the upper chamber, their bodies broken, one dragging his entrails behind him like a trailing banner. 2 ghouls, blind and howling, crawled along the floor like starving dogs, sniffing the blood-soaked stone for enemies. One had no jaw, and his rasping breaths echoed like wind through shattered bone. And then the temple screamed again. From above, light poured in, not the warm golden rays of the sun, but pure starlight, focused through a prism of ancient glyphs etched into the ceiling, now activated by the temple's defensive wards. The beams struck the floor, and from their convergence rose the first of the sunbound, constructs of living crystal, shaped like reptilian warriors, their weapons formed from concentrated solar fire. Behind them, the priests of Tepok descended on golden discs, skinksiers robed in feathers and gemstone armor. Their eyes glowed with alien wisdom, and in their hands they held staves bristling with Old One's sigils. They hissed in unison, gesturing toward Vranek. He felt the glyphs twist space. The air around him warped as hexes fell like arrows. One revenant collapsed, imploding with a sickening pop, his armor clattering to the floor like discarded scales. Vranek retaliated. He spoke a single word of unraveling, a syllable dragged from the black library beneath Nagashizar. A vortex of anti-magic burst from his mouth, collapsing one sunbound warrior into a shivering pile of shards. The light that had given it form howled as it died. "Move," he snarled. The remaining crew obeyed, or rather, their limbs did. Will had long fled their bodies. They fled down the spiraling path that coiled around the ziggurat's interior, stone trembling beneath their feet. The temple was collapsing in reversal, not falling down, but folding inward, returning to a shape it had not held since before men dreamed. Doors closed behind them without sound. Hallways disappeared as they passed. Time jittered and cracked. A corridor suddenly ran sideways, and one ghoul plunged screaming into a pit that hadn't existed seconds before. Outside, the jungle raged. The column of black light spilling from the broken sanctum had called every creature in the canopy. Roars echoed through the trees, terrible reptilian shrieks as carnosaurs and stegodons rampaged toward the blasphemy. The sky darkened, not from storm but from magic, a roiling tempest of divine fury, summoned by the Slann far away in their temple cities. But the hollow rain still stood. Its bone hull scorched, sails torn, but the ghost lanterns glowed bright with returning souls. Sorvath the helmsman, long thought drowned in the shard's earlier eruption, now stood at the helm once more, his face a warped ruin of sea rot and bone, but his hands steady. The survivors stumbled aboard. The revenants took defensive positions, readying the ballistae. Vranek stood at the bow, the shard spinning madly at his back. The lizard men poured from the jungle, Soros warriors roaring in formation, skinks riding beasts with golden horns, and the sunbound constructs marching in radiant precision. They would reach the ship in moments. But Vranek was faster. He raised the shard, and it screamed. A shockwave erupted, so violent, so final that the jungle bent away in a ring of annihilation. Trees were shredded, beasts crushed beneath the sound alone. The front line of the Soros warriors disintegrated, flesh boiling from their scales, bones cracking, memories evaporated. The hollow rain groaned, lifting itself from the shore with wind that wasn't wind, with sails of soul stuff, dragging itself across the shallows like a beast tearing free of a trap. As the ship broke into open water, Vranek looked back. The temple of the Old Ones collapsed entirely, folding into a singular point of light, then blinking out with a sound like a candle extinguished. The jungle screamed in mourning, but the sea welcomed its child of ruin, and the shard pulsed against Vranek's spine, whispering, "Only the beginning." Chapter 13. The Storm of Souls. The sea should have been calm. The waters around the hollow rain had once shimmered with the reflection of Lustria's hellish canopy, thick with brine and the stench of ancient death. Now they were black, not merely dark, but wrong. They swirled in impossible spirals, bending light, time, and direction. No stars reflected upon them, and the moon above hung as a bloated, unmoving corpse. The shard of Nagash, lashed in place above the prow like a trophy, throbbed. Chains of soul sinew connected it to the ship's timbers, pulsating with each heartbeat of the dark fragment. The deck beneath it rotted and reformed in eternal loops, caught in a death-birth cycle fed by its power. Vranek stood at the helm, his eyes sunk deep into a skull-like face. His robes flapped in wind that didn't touch the sails, and his shadows stretched across the deck like oil, splitting into twitching branches with minds of their own. And the whispers had grown louder. They came not from the shard now, but from everywhere. From the sea, from the planks, from the air itself. The shard had begun corrupting reality, like rot in the spine of the world. The first sign was the sky. It peeled, not in light, not in storm, but like paper. The clouds above tore in straight lines, revealing not the heavens but faces, millions of them, layered in endless sorrow and fury. They pressed against the sky, like inmates at a prison window, mouths open in perpetual scream. No sound came, but their rage seeped into the bones of the crew. Then came the rain. It fell in slow, thick droplets, blood mixed with memory. Every drop that struck the deck echoed with a voice, a dying scream, a prayer, a curse. Souls trapped in liquid descent. When it touched the ghouls, they shrieked and clawed at themselves, driven mad by the agony of 1,000 stolen deaths. One revenant stood too long in the storm. His armor corroded instantly, flesh blistering as every drop seeped into him. His body twisted, torn open by the sheer weight of sorrow. A dozen mouths formed across his skin, each one moaning a different name. Then he fell, twitching, to the boards, alive but screaming. Vranek did not flinch. He watched. He listened. And the sea answered. The waters began to boil. Not in heat, but in hate. Great coils of mist rose from the depths, shaped like serpents of bone and shadow. From the hull of the ship, spectral hands emerged, the spirits of those the shard had once enslaved. They came not in peace. Each soul was a knot of fury and anguish, half-formed, memories for skin, eyes like dim stars. They screamed as they poured across the deck, grasping at revenants, tearing ghouls apart with clawed fingers of ghost-stuff. The crew was being devoured by the past. And spirit, wearing the tattered crown of a long-dead king, lunged at a revenant and entered him. The undead warrior arched backward, his jaws snapping wide, and began to speak in a tongue so old it cracked the air. You wear the death of gods. You carry the hunger of the first sin. You are not meant to live. Vranek stepped forward, lifting his arm. The shard pulsed, and the spirit imploded, torn from its host and shredded in mid-air, sucked back into the fragment with a final shriek of betrayal. But the storm only worsened. The sea beneath the ship churned, revealing shapes. Ships. Whole armadas of spectral vessels rising from the depths, ghost galleons with shredded sails, longships made from bone, rafts made from stitched corpses. They surrounded the hollow rain, circling in slow predatory loops, and from them rose their crews. A legion of spirits, undead who had once served Nagash and died screaming, now recalled by the shard to bear witness to its ascension. The storm of souls had arrived, and it was hungry. Solvath the helmsman, face now half-bone and leaking seawater, snarled and turned the ship toward open waters. But the waves heaved, manipulated not by wind or tide, but will. The shard was not satisfied with one crew. It wanted everything. Lightning cracked above, green forked alive. It struck the sails, setting them ablaze with ghost fire. Screams rose from the wood itself. The ship moaned like a dying beast. Vranek raised his hands, speaking a counter-incantation that took his breath and the lives of 2 ghouls to cast. A wall of spectral flame burst from the ship's sides, lashing at the ghost ships, dissolving some, scattering others, but not enough. Too many, too loud, too angry. He turned to the shard, hovering now higher than before, wrapped in a corona of soul light. You want worship, he hissed. You want a throne, you'll have neither. He drew upon the soul vault at his waist, the prison that held Kaldrak's essence. It trembled, pulsed, and then he crushed it. Kaldrak's spirit screamed, a howl of rage and betrayal. The shard reacted, dimmed for a single moment. The spirits hesitated, and that was the only chance he had. Vranek carved a rune of banishment across his own chest, one that required his own blood, his own soul as a key. He cast the spell, and the sea broke. The ghost ships shattered into sparks. The clouds tore themselves apart. The rain stopped. The souls screamed and were dragged backward, back into the hole between death and memory from which they'd been vomited. Silence fell. The shard pulsed, dimmer, weak but awake. And watching, the hollow rain drifted, smoldering and broken, through a sea that had forgotten what it was. The storm had passed, but the cost had yet to be reckoned. Chapter 14. Mutiny of the Damned. The sea was dead still. The hollow rain floated upon a glassy expanse of water, the color of bone rot, unmoving beneath a sky choked with pale stars. There was no wind, no waves, no sound save for the creak of strained wood and the occasional low groan from the hull, as if the ship itself were struggling to keep from screaming. And beneath it all, The shards pulsed. It no longer hung in place like a relic. Now it hovered with intention, its aura stretching across the ship like an infection. Spectral tendrils coiled along the rigging, twisting sails into flesh-colored sheets. The wheel no longer turned by Sorvath's hand, but swiveled on its own, responding to the shard's silent commands. The crew had begun to change. The revenants, once bound by iron will and necromantic law, now shuddered in their armor. Their eyes bled smoke, and they whispered in tongues older than undeath. The ghouls had grown quiet, not the frantic, skittering beasts they once were, but still watchful. Their eyes never left Vranek. Even the shadows had turned. They moved wrong, split off from their casters, drifted in opposite directions. Some began mimicking, moving before the bodies they were meant to follow. Vranek felt the pressure growing. The shard was feeding, not just on the souls he had once commanded, but on the will of the undead. It was rewriting loyalty. And then it snapped. It began with a scream, wet, gurgling, primal. One of the revenants, his face split in half by a jagged rift of green light, turned on his kin. Without warning, he drove his sword through the skull of the helmsman beside him. Bone shattered, the corpse fell twitching, and the victor let out a soundless laugh. Then chaos erupted. All across the deck, the undead turned on each other, not in rage, but in ecstasy. The shard's whispers had promised each of them what they craved: freedom, flesh, power, memory. They had no need for Vranek now. He stood at the prow, the only being on deck, untouched by the madness. And even that was fading. A ghoul lunged at him, jaws distended, claws glinting with rot. He caught it mid-air with a burst of black flame. It howled, exploding mid-flight, intestines slapping wetly against the mast. But that was only one. They came in waves, ghouls, revenants, fragments of spirits pulled from their cages, all shrieking, eyes aglow with borrowed hope. The air rang with the clash of steel and bone, the ship running red with corrupted ichor. Vranek fought like a wounded god. Spells tore from his mouth, pure necrotic entropy, bolts of soul disintegration. One revenant turned to ash mid-swing. Another exploded into a cloud of razors, eviscerating a trio of traitors behind him. His staff was a flurry of motion, shattering skulls, rupturing torsos. Still, they came. Sorvath himself turned next. The drowned vampire's face twisted into a mask of blissful agony, his swollen body shuddering as dozens of barnacles burst open across his flesh, each one spewing black mist. He rose into the air on a column of seawater and lunged. Vranek raised a ward, too slow. Sorvath slammed into him, jaws stretching open to bite into his throat. Vranek's hand shot forward and plunged deep into Sorvath's chest. He whispered a true name. The drowned vampire froze, then screamed, his body convulsing as salt water flooded out from every orifice. His flesh peeled away in sheets, his bones cracked inward, and then he was gone. Only Vranek remained, bleeding, burned, alone. The deck was still again, but not silent. The shard floated above him, radiating heat and malice. Around it hovered the remnants of the mutinous crew, ghouls now fused with the deck. Revenants merged into the mast-like grotesque figureheads, their mouths stitched open in eternal moans. They had not died. They had been absorbed. And Vranek, cracked coughing smoke, raised his final spell. Forbidden. Unuttered. Meant only for gods and fools. He carved the runes into his own chest, gouging them with a shard of Sorvath's rib. His blood became ink, his voice the invocation. By bone unburied, by name unspoken, I bind the betrayers to me. The spell roared. Chains of soul fire lashed across the ship, dragging the mutinous spirits into the planks, the sails, the ropes. The hollow rain shuddered as its crew was bound into its structure, their minds locked in torment, their wills shattered and fused to the vessel itself. The ship became a crypt, and Vranek, its captain. He collapsed to his knees, the spell devouring what little was left of his mortal shell. His hands were blackened claws, his veins glowed with borrowed magic, his spine pulsed with the rhythm of the shard. And in the silence, the relic whispered, "You survived." As I knew you would. Vranek looked up, hollow-eyed, breath ragged. "You don't own me," the shard purred. "Not yet." Chapter 15. Island of the Dead. The hollow rain drifted into oblivion. Her sails were torn sinew, her hull a fusion of splintered bone and screaming soul stuff. Her crew silenced and entombed in the very structure that had once carried them. Only the shard remained whole, hovering above the masthead, casting a sickly pall of shifting green over the roiling sea. Then, on the edge of the horizon, land. A jagged mass of rock and sand emerged from the mist, its shoreline framed by massive, crumbling statues. They stood like sentinels, broken pharaohs carved from obsidian and sunstone, their faces eroded by time but still noble, still proud. The air reeked of embalming oils and long-dead incense. The wind that swept from the island was not air, but memory. Vranek barely had time to react. The sea beneath the hollow rain rebelled. The waters churned violently, not with waves, but with limbs, countless spectral arms reaching from beneath, grabbing the keel, the rudder, the hull. The dead had come to claim their due. The ship screamed. Timbers twisted, ghost iron splintered. The bound souls embedded in her rigging shrieked in endless torment as their bindings were torn. The shard pulsed in delight, feeding on the chaos, amused by the descent into ruin. Then came the final snap. The ship struck reef. The prow shattered first, the figurehead, a once screaming maiden, splintering into pieces that hissed as they vanished beneath the surf. The deck exploded into fragments. Spectral chains cracked and whipped across the wreck, lashing through the remains of hull and mast. Vranek was thrown into the sea. The impact crushed breath from his lungs, not air but magical essence, stolen vitality. He sank, darkness curling around him like velvet chains. Ghosts swirled around his body, whispering in Necrarch, kings, princes, high priests, their souls long since devoured, now lingering in agony. He clawed his way to the surface. The island awaited. The beach was a graveyard. Sand the color of old bone crunched underfoot. Broken sarcophagi lay half-buried like rotten teeth. Obelisks stood at crooked angles, their hieroglyphs flickering between scripture and accusation. Vranek dragged himself ashore, every bone in his body bruised, his robes in tatters, the shard now floating just behind him like a chained god-dog. The island spoke, not with voice, but vision. Before him, the landscape shimmered. The statues aligned, casting long shadows that shifted with a mind of their own. The sky warped, golden now, like Necrarch under the noon sun. And then he saw them. Ghosts. They emerged from the dunes in regal procession, kings of old, their golden masks gleaming, their staffs held high. Cloaks of finest linen, untouched by time, trailed behind them like mist. But their eyes, they bled. Each king's eyes wept rivers of ink and sand. They did not walk. They floated, tethered to invisible lines of regret and memory. Their mouths moved, and from them poured Vranek's past. You betrayed knowledge. You desecrated blood. You spoke the true names. You broke the pact. He stumbled backward. The dunes shifted again. Now Lariel stood before him, clad in her white robes, her pale face marred by nothing but sadness. No blood, no ruin, just the woman he had once loved, once tried to resurrect, once failed to save. You were meant for more, she whispered. I tried, Vranek croaked, his voice shaking. I wanted to. You fed your hate, not your heart. Behind her, the desert cracked open. From the fissure rose the dead of Nehekara, not the skeletal warriors of tomb kings, but the regrets of the realm, the unburied, the forgotten. Infants with open skulls, warriors missing their faces, women clutching stillborn children, weeping dust. They reached for him. Join us, Vranek. You wear the crown of silence. Your soul is already ours. He screamed and cast a ward, a rune of banishment, carved from his own blood. The illusions shattered. He stood alone, sweating, trembling, surrounded by broken stone, cracked tombs, and the whispers of the lost. And the shard laughed. Even here, you are nothing. You think you lead, but you are the most faithful of my servants. Vranek dropped to his knees, vomited black ichor, and slammed his fists into the sand. Above him, the shard rose higher. The sky darkened once more, and the island answered with another memory, not of the past, but of what could be. Chapter 16, Kaldrak's Return. The island moaned. From beneath its sun-bleached sands and shattered tombs, the air grew heavy, thick with ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes a grave. Vranek staggered across the necropolis shore, his hands still smeared with blood and phantoms, his senses blunted by grief and poisoned memory. But he felt it. A presence, not merely powerful, not merely hateful, but divine in its blasphemy, rising from below the crust of the world. And then the sands erupted. A tower of bone and obsidian claws tore from the island's heart, flinging sarcophagi and shattered kings into the air like chaff. The sky turned black, the wind reversed, and a scream not meant for mortal ears shrieked across the heavens. Thunder cracked, not in the sky, but in the soul. From the maw of the eruption stepped Kaldrak reborn, no longer man, no longer revenant. He was a god-shaped wound in reality, his body a cathedral of undeath and rage, fused with a splinter of the shard. His once broken armor had grown into him, fused with muscle and hate, each plate inscribed with runes that bled light. Spines of soul steel jutted from his shoulders like wings, and his right arm had become a weapon, not held, but grown, a jagged limb of bone and obsidian, ending in a sword longer than most men. His face, barely recognizable, was a skull encased in black flame, his eyes pits of green fire. He spoke, and the sand turned to glass. You took my soul, Vranek, but I made a better bargain. The ground cracked as he stepped forward. I am not dead. I am chosen. Vranek tried to speak, but no words came. Kaldrak raised his blade hand and pointed it at him. I was meant to ascend. You were meant to kneel. He charged. The impact was a meteor. Vranek barely cast a deflective glyph before Kaldrak's blade cleaved through half the ruins behind him. The spell shattered like glass, throwing Vranek backward through a crumbling obelisk. He struck the ground, ribs snapping, blood spurting from his mouth. Kaldrak didn't stop. He stalked forward, every step leaving behind burnt sand and ruptured memories, his very presence unmaking the illusions around them. The island's spirits scattered, their ghostly bodies torn into luminous shreds by the mere proximity of his hatred. Vranek dragged himself to his feet, blood leaking from his eye sockets. He snarled. He chanted. Forbidden glyphs lit up around him, sigils of silence, of eternal hunger. They twisted the wind, bent the light, summoned chains of soul flame that lashed toward Kaldrak like serpents. Kaldrak caught them and ripped them apart with his bare hand. Your magic is dead. It kneels now like everything else. He slammed his blade arm down, cracking the island in half. A tidal wave of sand and bone burst upward, throwing Vranek again. The Necrarch struck a funerary pillar and fell limply to the ground, coughing black ichor, his limbs twitching from feedback. Kaldrak loomed above him, shadow stretching for miles. You think you have purpose? You are fuel. You were always fuel. He raised his weapon, no longer merely a sword, but an executioner's monument. Vranek's hands trembled. He whispered one word. The shard responded. It screamed. Kaldrak faltered just for a moment as the splinter embedded in his chest glowed wildly, flickering with memories not his own. She loved me, Vranek whispered. You have nothing. Kaldrak roared. He swung, and Vranek disappeared in a crack of black lightning, his body scattering into a flock of carrion birds that vanished into the darkened sky. Kaldrak bellowed after him. The island, fractured by his return, began to collapse into the sea. Obelisks toppled, tombs imploded. The dead wailed in agony, freed only to witness a greater doom. Kaldrak stood amidst the ruin, divine and horrific, the shard now singing through his every thought. He was death reborn, and he would not stop until the world bled. Chapter 17. The Shard's Choice. The world burned behind him. Vranek crawled through the tangled underbrush of the dying island, hands torn, face streaked with blood and ash, ribs grinding with every ragged breath. His magic had bled out of him like marrow, leaving his body brittle, weak, but his mind was clear. Crystal sharp, the shard pulsed behind his ribs. No longer tethered by chains or runes, the fragment had burrowed into his flesh, lodged in his chest where his heart should have been. He could feel it growing, not physically but spiritually, expanding within him like a god preparing to bloom. Every step Vranek took, the shard whispered. Sweet, seductive. You've seen what I can make of Kaldrak. You can be more. Visions poured into his skull, a throne of rib cages seated upon the ruins of Nagashazar, rivers of warpstone fire flowing with the blood of dead gods. Vranek ascending, not as a Necrarch, not even as a vampire, but as death made will. Why suffer, Pale One? Why burn in sacrifice when you could rule? His legs buckled. He collapsed at the edge of a chasm, where the island split open, a yawning maw of black lava and soul fire reaching toward the sky. The wind here was madness, howling with the voices of every soul the shard had consumed since its creation. Some wept, some laughed, all begged. He reached inside his robes, pulling free a ritual knife, one carved from obsidian mined beneath the screaming spires, its blade lined with the teeth of dead prophets. In his other hand he clutched a tome bound in stitched flesh, writhing as if alive, the Book of Final Light, stolen from a slan vault filled with rites that undid the fabric of undeath. The shard screamed in his mind. You would destroy me? After all I've shown you? After all you've suffered? He carved the first sigil into the ground, a crooked spiral representing the unmaking of names. Blood poured from his wrist, sizzling where it touched the stone. He spoke the incantation through gritted teeth, his voice cracking with each syllable. His eyes were... The earth wept. Reality cringed. The shard fought back. Tendrils of spectral flesh burst from his chest, lashing at his limbs, anchoring him to the ground. They dragged him toward the edge of the chasm, toward the core of the island. toward where the shard could fully ascend through his corpse. Vranek screamed and twisted the ritual knife into his own stomach, severing the tether. Blood sprayed. A piece of his soul ripped free, a glowing shard of him, drifting upward, feeding the ritual's hunger. The shard howled. "You are nothing without me, a failure, a broken godling clinging to old grief." He laughed through the blood. "You're right." He drew the second sigil. This one pulsed, alive with intent. It burned into the stone, blistering the ground in a circle around him. The wind died. Time slowed. The shard flickered. The final chant began. 12 lines. 12 deaths. He spoke of Lyriel's murder, of the betrayal of the Necrarchs, of the devouring of his soul, of every corpse he'd raised, every hope he'd murdered, each word a blade, each breath a sacrifice, each syllable a war against fate. The shard pulsed faster, louder. "You'll kill yourself," it hissed. "You'll lose everything." He smiled through the pain. The final glyph etched itself onto the earth, a shattered crown, split down the center, dripping with blood. The ritual ignited. The shard screamed. It was not a noise, it was a collapse. Stars dimmed, the sky trembled. Kaldrak, miles away across the ocean, felt it and roared, his own body racked with pain. The fragment burst from Vranek's chest, ripping free like a parasite denied its host. It hovered, trembling, warping the air around it with divine fury. Vranek lifted his hand and spoke the last word. A name never meant to be heard again. The shard shattered. A wave of darkness exploded outward, ripping across the island, through the sky, across the sea. Mountains bowed. Spirits wailed. And every soul the shard had ever consumed was freed in a moment of impossible grace, each one released to whatever afterlife had once waited. Vranek collapsed. His chest was a hollow wound. His veins glowed with flickering remnants of magic. His soul was fractured. But he was free, and the shard was no more. Or so he believed. Chapter 18. The Final Rite. Lightning split the sky like a screaming wound. The island was dying, its stone cracked, bleeding lava and soul fire. Its trees, once haunted by ghosts and lizards alike, burned in blue flame or withered into ash. A hurricane of spirits howled overhead, the sky churning with the madness of a world unstitched. In the heart of this cataclysm stood Vranek, broken but defiant. His robes hung in tatters, his flesh blackened from the shard's purge. Bones jutted from his skin like cracked marble. His left eye had burst hours ago, replaced by a void that wept silence. His blood hissed on the stones as he carved the final runes of the last rite, his fingers raw stumps of charred meat. The ritual pulsed beneath him, etched into the earth with pain and memory, fueled by every soul he had ever torn from flesh. 12 glyphs, spinning slowly, each representing a truth. Betrayal, grief, hunger, vengeance, and the death of gods. The sky screamed again, and Kaldrak returned. He fell from the clouds like a meteor, crashing into the earth with a quake that split the jungle's spine. His form was colossal, twice the size of a man, twisted by divinity and fused with raw hate. His armor had grown into a throne of bone and demon steel, his flesh scorched by warp flame, and from his chest still pulsed the core essence of the shard, flickering like a black sun. In his hand he held a weapon no longer bound by shape, an axe formed from the regrets of 100 murdered kings, its edge a ripple of pure annihilation. "You think this ends here?" Caldrag's voice was thunder, dipped in contempt. "You burned the fragment, pale worm, but I am the seed." He stepped forward. The earth around him died. Flowers crumbling, corpses clawing free from the soil, only to bow to his presence. The undead storm surged with him, a tide of wraiths, broken spirits, animated bones, howling with joyless hunger. Vranek lifted a staff bound with soul chains and cursed bone. "I did not end the shard," he said, voice shaking. "I purified it, burned its will. Now I'll bury yours." Caldrag roared and charged. Their first clash shook the island. Caldrag's axe met Vranek's staff in a detonation of unlight. The impact blew trees from the cliffside and turned sand to glass. Wraiths shattered mid-slight. Spirits screamed as their forms were unraveled by the shockwave. Caldrag spun, cleaving sideways. Vranek ducked beneath it, casting a net of soul fire, chains made of regret and name-forgotten agony that wrapped around Caldrag's arm and dug in. "Ofreda," Caldrag bellowed, tearing free. Flesh and steel alike peeled away, revealing veins of shifting shadow. He punched forward. Vranek raised a shield of necrotic force. It shattered. Guarded a third time. Utunal didn't blink. The impact hurled Vranek into the air. He struck a broken obelisk, bones snapping. He coughed blood and fury, stood, and summoned. From the ritual circle burst a tide of jungle spirits, ancient, saurian, spectral beasts with eyes of starlight. They charged, trampling over the undead storm, tearing apart Caldrag's skeletal horde with claws of light and memory. Caldrag laughed. "You borrow gods. I become them." He lifted his arms, and the souls he had consumed screamed into the sky. A vortex formed overhead, howling and void-black. From it fell constructs, hybrid monsters of bone and shadow, stitched together with curses. One lashed out with a tongue of fused spines, impaling 3 jungle spirits. They vanished in a burst of stardust. The sky collapsed into war. Lightning of warp and wind clashed, each bolt flaying the air. Above them, the undead storm and spirit cyclone collided, forming a maelstrom of flesh, bone, soul, and wrath. In its center, Vranek and Caldrag fought. Spell met steel. Pain met purpose. Caldrag's axe shattered the ground in a wave of deathlight. Vranek split it in half with a spoken word that turned the air to knives. Caldrag's fist slammed into Vranek's skull. Bone cracked, brain bled. Vranek responded by vomiting a stream of fire made from his own stolen soul, which ignited Caldrag's chest and tore a shriek from the monster's throat. They fell together into the ritual circle, glyphs flaring around them. Vranek, mouth full of blood, muttered the final lines of the rite. No gods, no lords, just death, freed. Caldrag stabbed downward. Vranek caught the blade with both hands, flesh searing, bones cracking and twisted. The spell ignited. 12 pillars of light erupted around them, each formed from a single truth denied. Caldrag screamed, the shard core in his chest shriveling. Vranek spat blood in his face. The gone monster. The final rite consumed them both. Chapter 19. Ashes of Ambition. There was no sky, only ash. A slow gray rain of pulverized stone, bone, and the calcified remnants of shattered souls fell from above, hissing as it touched the scorched ground. The storm had ceased. The maelstrom of spirits collapsed into a silence so deep it throbbed like a drumbeat. The battlefield was a graveyard of gods and ghosts. In the center, Vranek knelt. His body was a ruin. The ritual had burned away most of his flesh. His skin hung in ragged strips, scorched black and red. His left leg was gone at the knee, cauterized to a stump by warp fire. The ribs on his right side were exposed, visible beneath hanging muscle. His mouth leaked thick, dark ichor, and his right eye was gone, replaced by a smoldering socket that still saw truth. But he lived, and Kaldrak did not. The monster's body lay crumpled beneath the remains of the final glyph circle, reduced to a scorched husk of fused bone, shattered armor, and cracked obsidian. The shard embedded in his chest had fractured into glowing fragments, twitching like dying stars, but not dead. Never dead. The pieces of the shard pulsed. Vranek felt it, the will lingering within them. Mute, furious, waiting, and even destroyed. It hungered. He dragged himself across the cracked stone, broken fingers clawing at the earth, blood smearing arcane symbols as he moved. Each breath was an eternity, each heartbeat a betrayal of the death that circled him. He reached the remains of the shard. Its largest piece, no bigger than a fist, quivered as he touched it. Whispering tried to seep into his mind again, faint and desperate. "You need me?" He crushed the voice with a thought. From his robes, soaked and burned, he pulled the soul vault. An orb forged from Nehekaran star metal and fused with runes etched in demon tongue. It screamed as it was activated, its surface unfolding like an eye opening. Vranek spoke no words. He offered no prayer. He simply pushed the shard fragment inside. The moment it touched the vault's core, the air screamed. The ground around him cracked. Wind howled. 1,000 voices rose and fell in agony. Vranek held on. He whispered the final incantation, not in any mortal tongue, but in the language of loss. A sacrifice of hope. A death curse that would bury the shard for eternity. The vault sealed. A soft click. Then silence. He lay back, eyes fixed on the clouds of ash swirling above. Around him, the jungle burned. Undead husks twitched and twitched no more. Spirits faded like mist at dawn. The world had ended, at least this corner of it. But he wasn't done. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself to the cliffs overlooking the sea. Beneath him, the ocean churned black and endless. A trench yawed below, the maw of the drowned, a chasm so deep even gods feared it. He held the vault to his chest, murmured a curse, and imbued it with the last shard of his soul. Then he cast it into the abyss. It fell silently, vanishing into the black, and with it, every ambition, every dream, every hatred, every fragment of Nagash's will was swallowed by the sea. Vranek collapsed. He stared at the sky, saw nothing, only the soft drift of ashes, and smiled, just once. Chapter 20. The Hollow Rain. The sea was flat and endless, a mirror of black glass. No stars shone, no sun pierced the veil. The horizon circled in eternal dusk. The only sound was the groan of a ship, massive, broken, and yet undying, as it drifted aimlessly across the cursed waters. The hollow rain. Its sails were torn flesh, dried and sun-bleached, whispering secrets to no one. Its masts cracked with every slow sway, but never broke. The hull, a fused mass of bone, metal, and tormented souls, glowed faintly from within, as if something still breathed inside. But the ship had no crew. Not anymore. Its ghouls had torn each other apart in the storm. The revenants had gone mad and burst into flames of blasphemous memory. Sorvath's helm sat untouched, his corpse fused with the wheel, jaw hanging open in an endless scream. And Vranek, the Pale Master, was no more. Yet the hollow rain still sailed. It did not need wind, it did not need stars. The ocean parted for it, sensing the curse lodged deep in its hull. Not a shard of wood or soul aboard had been untouched by the shard's legacy. Below the deck in the darkest chamber, the air still moved. Lanterns flickered without oil, chains rattled without breeze. In the belly of the ship, embedded in a tangle of broken spellglyphs and soul iron ribs, the last whisper lingered. A voice, soft, hungry. I remember. The shard was gone, cast into the trench, sealed within a vault bound by Vranek's dying curse. But nothing that had once held Nagash's will could ever be truly destroyed. Deep in the bones of the ship, something twitched. A single rune, long burned out, reignited, a red ember pulsing in the silence. One of the soul lanterns swayed gently, and inside it a shape began to form, a spark of green fire with one eye, waiting. The ship creaked, its figurehead groaning, its mouth stretching wider than before, as if preparing to scream. The waves grew dark. The wind shifted. The hollow rain turned east, sails filling with unnatural force, its prow aimed toward distant lands, toward life, toward new voices. And as it sailed, the whisper grew louder. Not the end, just the next beginning.